Globally, 1.4 million children are blind. And in the United States, only about 10% of the blind children are taught to read Braille. Fewer than 40% graduate from high school, and just under 30% of the blind or visually impaired adults are employed. These are not just statistics. They are symptoms of an unequal system that fails to see their full potential. When we hear the word blind, most people think this: total darkness. But in reality, over 90% of people who are legally blind still have some degree of vision, whether it's light perception, blurry shapes, or tunnel vision. Yet, society continues to treat them as completely sightless, leading to one-size-fits-all support systems that don't fit most of them at all. Now, imagine this. You are a bright student with sharp mind and a hunger to learn, and dreams just as vivid as anyone else's. But your textbooks aren't accessible, your teachers aren't trained, and the school playground, the computer lab, the art room, all of them say not for you, in silent, invisible ways. One teacher who taught arts for the disabled, blind, and low vision students saw this vividly and did something about it. Daniel Lubiner, a veteran teacher and an entrepreneur who believes creating and enjoying art and the opportunity to succeed in education and employment should not be limited because of a disability. And he's creating those opportunities. Today, Daniel joins us to share his experiences as a teacher and his inventions as an entrepreneur for the blind and low vision students. Welcome back to Career Calling, your ultimate guide to navigating the world of work, one profession at a time, to help you find your calling and turn it into a career. I'm your host, Pratibha Pandit. Hi, Daniel. Welcome to Career Calling.
Thank you for having me. It's really cool videos you have about all these different careers, and people can check them out. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm really glad to have you on this episode because, as you probably are very well aware, much of the general public moves around life being largely unaware of what is happening in the world for the people with disabilities. So I'm hoping to educate myself, become more aware with this episode.
Mhm. I've been a teacher for 25 years. Okay. It's originally into acting, always into the arts, art studio type thing.
Uh-huh.
And so I use that in my teaching, but mostly I taught special education. So I taught reading and all kinds of all subjects, actually, math, social studies, science, whatever they needed me for. And I got the pleasure to teach all different types of levels, and everything from autism to Down syndrome to emotionally disturbed, a lot of emotionally disturbed students. And then it was about, I guess, 10 years ago now, I was working at this school that was, I got a job teaching art for emotionally disturbed students. And it was a school where most of the school was a school for the blind. It's actually been around for 200 years in the Bronx in New York City. I was in this school that was mostly school for the blind, and they made a change where the art teacher for the blind was going to be the vice principal. So they said, okay, Daniel, now you're going to teach all the blind kids. And I was like, what am I going to, and I was really nervous at first. It was pretty scary, like going in there and thinking about how we're going to adjust all these lessons. Everything in art seems like visual, but it was an amazing experience. It was just incredible. And you think, like, a lot of times when we're around people with disabilities, we get uncomfortable. Okay. They're not uncomfortable. We get uncomfortable.
Very
We're like,
interesting.
are we going to say the wrong thing? I don't want to say something stupid or make somebody feel a certain way. But really, they're just people. They're just people like us. and their
Mhm.
disability doesn't come first. Okay. So
Mhm.
I think the biggest thing I learned was like, these were not blind children. These were children. Because we see blind children, we go, oh my goodness, they're blind children. No, they're just children. And the teenagers were teenagers. The children want to
Mhm.
play and have fun and get their
Mhm.
faces into the clay and get all dirty. And the teenagers, they want to do cool things and learn about artists and go on dates and make out in the hall. It's pretty amazing that you get certain things in your head. Like a lot of us think if you're blind, you're either blind or you're not blind. And that's not the case at all.
Mhm.
Blindness is a spectrum. Only
Mhm.
5% of people, so 5% of my students were fully blind. Okay.
Hmm.
Most of them could see a little bit of something. When you're talking about like how blind students are educated, getting back to your question, as far as their regular subject matters, I didn't really get into that too much. There are
Mhm.
people who are
Mhm.
trained to teach
Mhm.
blind and
Mhm.
low vision students. They're called CVIs, and they they have O&M training, which is training to go around and use their canes properly and not get hurt. So there's all different types of training, and I was mostly art. So I did
Mhm.
mostly art training. But with my invention that we'll get to in a minute, I took
Mhm.
everything that I had learned and put it into that.
Mhm. Is it more common for students to go into the traditional neighborhood K-12 schools or more in the special education schools?
That's an excellent question. And it really depends on what's available
Hmm.
and where people are living. I've heard a lot of times that families will move to a place where a school is available. They'll
Hmm.
just pick up and move because there's not a lot of schools that are available. And there are many people who do go to just public schools that are around and they get services like people who come in and teach them about Braille, teach them about moving around, like I said. But a lot of times those services are lacking. Imagine this, okay? I don't know. I have a son, right? And he was in special ed. So I imagine if they came to me and said, listen, your son's in special ed. So we're only going to teach him reading and writing. We can only do that
Hmm.
once a week for 45 minutes. Is that okay?
Hmm. Wow. No.
And that's basically what they say to a lot of blind parents.
Okay.
Like,
Mhm.
we could only teach Braille once a week because there's one teacher that goes around and
Mhm.
in these rural areas. And that's why we come up with these numbers. Okay. 10%, only 10% of children in the United States are learning Braille who should be learning Braille.
Hmm.
And this is one of the reasons. And in places like
Mhm.
India, South Africa, it's less than 1% are learning Braille.
Mhm.
Now, if you don't have a base of some type of education, some type of reading and writing, it's really going to affect your future. We see that also because in the future, what is it? 32% graduate high school, 16% college,
Mhm.
70% are unemployed. This is in a country where we think we're so advanced and we're so accommodating to people and we're able to help people out, really out of sight, out of mind.
Yep.
If
Yep.
we're not
Very
thinking
much.
about them, we're not going to have services for them.
Mhm. When you're talking about services, is it only the lack of trained teachers, or is it also about the technology or other things? Because I'm more and more becoming aware of the fact that so much of our world is built for people without disability. I think it is, I would imagine, so difficult for other students to mingle and then learn and then get integrated.
Hmm.
What's your thoughts on that about how much is the technology or other things helping them?
In a lot of ways, technology is helping. Okay. So you have everything from nowadays mapping and
Hmm.
talk back. So you could get
Hmm.
your phone to read everything on your screen. And
Voice
they
technology.
even read it 4 times as fast. So they'll go
Hmm.
just swiping through things. So they get very used to a lot of apps are accessible, but a
Hmm.
lot of things are not accessible. A lot of things
Hmm.
are visual. A lot
Hmm.
of apps or applications or websites are not made accessible. That's a
Hmm.
huge thing. Is you go to a website and it's not set up to be read,
Hmm.
where a person who's using a screen reader will just get to a box and the box will say enter value. And you're like, what do I do? But technology is helping, but I think in a way it's also hurting. Okay.
Hmm.
And that's just from my perspective because they're relying on technology. I had this actually happen. I went into a guy's office and he was actually like this leader of this university, really like the president of this section of a university. And I went in with my invention and I said, look, this is to teach beginning Braille. And he said, so what, is Braille really necessary nowadays? I was like, and there's a lot of people who really believe that, you know,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
it's becoming irrelevant because you could listen. Okay.
Hmm.
You can, you could type and listen to what you're typing. Okay. So you could type on a computer. You can learn to type on a computer. You can learn to where all the keys are. So in those ways, you could get by without Braille. But guess what? You're not learning how to read and write. That's
Yeah.
why I have seniors that when I did reports with them, they couldn't make a paragraph. So you have these seniors who are graduating, 18 years old, they can't write an email to somebody.
Mm. Mm.
And you can't write a cohesive email. How do you expect to be employed in this day and age? It's impossible. So, yeah, the education is the start. And having access, like hopefully future technologies. I have 2 inventions right now. One is the Braille Doodle, where I came up with this over the course of the pandemic to
Mhm.
try and say, okay, kids are home, they don't have anything, they're not able to learn Braille. What can we do to give them something to learn Braille? So I wanted to come up with something we could mass produce inexpensively, and then they could start learning Braille at home. A, B, B, C, and so on. And maybe even do artwork.
The subject of art is such a visual form. How did you go about it? Teaching to.
Teaching art,
Mhm.
when I was teaching, I did a lot of sculpture, wire sculpture, a
Mhm.
lot of 3D things coming off the paper or off the canvas. And it was really just, it was very fun because it was a real challenge to think of different ways like that we could change things up and make them beyond visual. Can we make a Mona Lisa that starts with a mask? So we
Mm.
start with the face coming out, and then we'll put on the hair and stuff. One thing, a student of mine was doing a report on Jackson Pollock. So Jackson Pollock was the artist who threw paint all over the
Paint, yeah.
canvas and
Mhm.
did all that splatter type painting. I had him stand up on a chair and I put
Mhm.
out a big canvas underneath him. So he stands up on a chair and I say, just start tipping it over and listen listen to the paint hitting the
Hmm.
canvas and move it around, see if you could listen to it moving around. And then we did that. And then, of course, after it dries, then he has something he can touch because it's very tactile when
Hmm.
you have that thick paint coming off
Hmm.
the canvas.
That's very interesting. You've been a special education teacher for so long and you're an inventor now. I was very curious to hear about your journey. Like, how did you decide to become a special education teacher? And then how did you become an inventor?
Yeah. So actually, I was very into acting and drama
Hmm.
originally in
Hmm.
college, and I've done some shows and some things. As they say, it's very hard to break into, and but I was getting frustrated, and I probably gave up too soon. But I said, you know what? I want a family, I want the kids, I want the house. So
Hmm.
my parents were teachers, so
Hmm.
I had this opportunity to become a teacher's aide, and I took it, and they paid for my master's degree. And so I got my master's and I became a special ed teacher. And then coincidentally, my son was born and he was on the autistic spectrum. That was a firsthand experience in working with a student with Asperger's or high functioning autism, however you want to put it. So I really enjoyed it for a long time. One thing that's very difficult, I think all teachers will tell you, was a couple things. The pay, okay. You're just not respected when it comes to the amount of money that you
Hmm.
make for the amount of work that you put in, because it's not an 8 to 3 job, people. You don't get lots of vacations and stuff, and just it's a very emotionally, physically draining job that deserves respect. And so when I was working with the blind kids, I started coming up with these ideas for invention. Like you said, how can technology be something like that would be amazing for kids who are blind or low vision? So I started thinking of something called the Touchpad Pro.
Hmm.
So that would be something with thousands of pins.
Hmm.
Just like thinking like, what if we had like Elon Musk's team, okay, a
Hmm.
team at okay at X space, whatever, and we had millions of dollars, and we would actually spend that on blind kids. What will we be able to do? Will we be able to create something that had a selfie that your face
Hmm.
would come out of the surface so you could feel your whole face, your eyes, your
Hmm.
nose, your mouth? So I started with that, okay,
Hmm.
and developing that idea and how you would accomplish that, put color into the idea. So it would
Hmm.
be like color pixels that would be able to be felt, right?
Hmm. How is
And
that? How is that possible?
fiber optics, probably
Hmm.
LED, fiber optics. So you have a whole bunch of pins. You think about that thing like the nail art do.
Hmm.
And if all those were lit up different colors, then we could do Mona Lisa. If you want to go to touchpadpro.org, then you could see some video that I've been
Hmm.
creating with artists. And so we're making 3D video to demonstrate what it would be like. I've been trying to do this one for 6 years, and I've been working on the patent. Because nobody takes you seriously if you don't have a patent. I have
Hmm.
this great idea, this concept, and we're going to go and we're going to sell it to lots of people. We could do special education with this thing as well. But do you have a patent? Do you have a plan? Do you have a
Hmm.
way to do it? It took about 4 years, 5 years of going back and forth with the patent office, thousands of dollars with lawyers and stuff like that. And I finally was granted the patent. It was pretty cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's really great.
Thank you.
Was your focus mostly to teach Braille or was it focused on art? Can you tell a little bit more about what are your goals with the Touchpad Pro?
Yeah, originally Touchpad Pro was going to be more art than more visual centered. Like, how can
Mhm.
we bring the visual world to those who are blind and low vision. And like I said, people who are blind and low vision, 5% are fully blind. The others want to use whatever kind of sight they have. They get close to the screens or whatever they could do. So can we make something that's multisensory, that will have sound and touch and some vision? So there was the art piece, and having, like, we have an iPad, we have computers that go anywhere. They don't have as much as that. They're starting to, though. There's more and more Braille computers and stuff like that. But again, you have to know Braille if you get to a computer. But this came along, and this was like a brainstorm that sort of started with the pandemic, right? So I'm teaching, and then the pandemic happens and all the students go home, right? You probably heard how they were teaching students, which is over the internet, over Zoom calls just like this. So you try to do your science lesson, you have all your students up here, they could raise their hand, you call on different kids and stuff like that. But now take away the visual, okay? And what do you have? You have just
Sound, yeah.
telephone. Yeah. So we couldn't do any art. We couldn't do, and Braille instruction practically stopped because they had nothing in front of them. So to teach Braille, they need something to touch. They need to go along and feel something that would be in front of them. I took this also from the perspective of a teacher, of teaching reading. So as I said, I really enjoyed teaching reading, taking a kid from being a non-reader all the way to being a reader. So the first thing you do is you teach them the letters and the sounds, right? So you go through, and they have to have modeled examples. So this first cell, so there's 6 dots in every Braille cell. It goes one, and they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Now for the letter A, only the number 1 comes up, right? And that's in this cell. This is the modeling cell. So this will tell you which one to model. And over here, you copy it actually in this cell. There you go. Everything's reversed. I'm not sure if your viewers are going to see this in reverse, but this is A, B, C, D. So the model is here, and you practice it here. But you can mess up over here. Oh, I put those ones up, right? I didn't want to put those up. It doesn't feel the same. So I put it down. Okay, I push it down.
So this Braille Doodle is mainly to learn Braille, practice Braille, or both?
This is to learn Braille, practice Braille, right? And also go on to doing words and sentences. So you could do, after you learn letters, you have to go to cat and fat and sat and mat, and the fat cat sat on the mat, and all of that. And then you also have examples of real Braille. So real Braille is actually very small. You know, these little rectangles here, they have the real Braille, okay, for each thing. So this is real Braille, A, B, C. And then there was this side, which started opening up all kinds of possibilities. It actually started with this side. Like, what could I do with this side that would help teach Braille? We could do artwork, and like, for understanding, we call it like an Etch-a-Sketch for the blind, because anybody could get on here and start just doing things, and you could feel as you're going along that you're making something, right? But it just expanded up after that. And when you're done, you just erase what you're doing by pushing it back down. But then I was thinking, like, what if we cover things up, right? Make stencils that could slide in there. So this took years to develop, but there was an advantage to that. One of the advantages, we have this. like coming up with new ideas of how we could teach different things. If you have the student do this and trace it out, then what are they feeling? They're going to feel like the trees and the houses. They're going to be able to practice the age,
Mhm.
and they're going to feel these things, and they're going to be like, oh, this is what a house. What about if this tree is further away than this tree? Could it be that this tree is actually the same size as this tree? Like just the concepts that we take for
Concepts, yeah.
granted of perspective and visual
Mhm.
things is different. And this also opened up like a lot of different things. There's nothing really that's available that does graphs that students can manipulate. They could be handed a graph and they could say, okay, this is the graph. I could feel the line. That's the line. But that's not the way math always works, right? Math
Mhm.
works, it changes. Say I have an XY axis here and I do equation. Just trying to push these in. But then I could graph the equation.
Mhm.
So now this makes it useful for high school and college level because they don't
Mhm.
have anything like that. In this case, they can plot out the points just by feeling and counting. Okay. But it's really interesting how it becomes a snowball effect.
Mhm.
And I went to India, one of the first places I went to with this, and it was just a wonderful experience meeting students over there. And there's a real need for things like this over in India. And one thing we could also do with this is we could teach Braille in any language, right?
Hmm.
So we can
Hmm.
make covers so we could teach Braille in Hindi, Tamil, teach Braille in Chinese or Swahili. So it's very exciting what's happening. Just, yeah, long time to get it done and a lot of ups and downs. And if anybody wants to be an entrepreneur out there and try to create an invention and take that invention from idea to actually putting it on the market, get ready for a roller coaster ride because it is not easy.
Mhm.
Trying to get the money for it. I started a nonprofit so we could get the money for this. So that was a whole thing. Then you have people who are volunteering for a nonprofit, but then they don't do anything. Or you have
Mhm.
people who volunteer for the nonprofit and then they start fighting each other or they get
Mhm.
angry with me. It's just like a
Mhm.
lot of things that go on. But
Mhm.
in the end, it's good. When I sit there with the kids and I have the examples and I watch them do it, it's just magic.
Mhm.
So
So where is it
when you go
now?
on my
Like,
website, yeah,
are you still in the process of developing? Like, where is it now? Is it?
it's actually going into manufacturing. So we're hopefully going to have them in boxes by the end of April, June.
No, that's
But
good.
every time I say that, it goes back another month. So I shouldn't really say that because that's another thing with developing products
Mhm.
is there's always, oh, we thought that was going to go fine.
Mhm.
There are 1,333. I don't know why it came out to that. So 1,333 balls on this side. Okay.
Mhm.
About 500 on this side. Now, if one doesn't work, you can't use it. So to have them all work and all work perfectly.
Mhm. Is it to make
Yeah.
it available directly to consumers, or do you want to take it to schools? How do you want to make it available?
Yeah. Actually, I am planning to be a wholesaler, just send it out to distributors and stuff like that. Right now, we've already pre sold. So we had a Kickstarter. So that was another way we raised money to get
Mhm.
manufacturing. So we had a pretty successful Kickstarter where we sold and we have website sales. So we're up to 630. if these are sold already. And it's good that we have the money for it now so we could use that towards making and manufacturing. So that worked out well. But yeah, I don't want to be really a retail person for this type of thing. Well, when we did the Braille Doodle, originally it was combined with the Touchpad Pro as a for-profit company, right? That we were looking for investors, right? But investors got very interested. They loved the story. They loved the whole idea, but they want their guaranteed return on investment. They're going to want to know, what have you sold already? What have you done? Can I return? When I could get 10 times my money? Forget about 1 times my money. When can I get, if I'm going to give you 1 million, when am I going to give 5 million? So I found that the way to go for this, at least, was to start a nonprofit, start gathering up just donations a little bit at a time. And then I got some really nice donors who were able to put out some significant money, because actually to develop it costs about 60,000 just for engineers to work with it and think about how you're going to get those balls up. And you got them up just right, and then you got to push them back down, and they'll stay down. It's quite an adventure. Yeah.
I can imagine. So Touchpad Pro and Braille Doodle, the difference, can you elaborate that a little bit more? What is it different? How is it different?
Yeah, so now you see all the electronics that we're talking about here. If you think about being able to do art, to draw, to go to apps, to feel Starry Night, what is Starry Night like, and have everything in full, vivid color that you could adjust to your own vision.
So these are LED
And that was
lights?
like a Braille typewriter.
These are lights?
These could be actually a lot of the creation of the actual device is going to take place afterwards. Like I said, we're talking engineers that could work at SpaceX that are going to be necessary. So I've hooked up with some people at Boston Engineering. They're up there like with Boston Dynamics, all those robotics and all those stuff. So they have those types of engineers, but they just want $500,000 just for a small POC, which is a proof of concept. So because this is, that is no joke. When you talk about what type of technology is out there already, there's like tiny motors, there's tiny things to go up and down and everything. But putting them all together and having them all cooperate, that's a whole software issue, a hardware issue, an energy issue. And then you add in lights and LED. So it's going to be quite the challenge. So that's why when it's coming to the LLC, when I'm going to start going after investors again, which I'm going to try to be doing. So if anybody's really wealthy out there and wants to be wealthier, no, we're going after a $1 million investment, because that's what's going to take to really get this off the ground. But I tell you, once this is off the ground, I think it's going to be extremely successful. And not only for the blind and low vision, and that's why I think this is one of the key factors. Because if you're looking at just the blind and low vision, okay, it's a small market, right? And that's what investors look at, first of all. How many people are going to buy this? But how wonderful is this going to be for kids with autism, for kids with learning disabilities? Okay, it's huge. What if we put AI into it? You add AI, and what is that going to do? It's going to learn the way you learn and be able to teach you back the way you learn. That's one thing that I'm excited for AI. You hear all these horror stories of robots like attacking us or something. But one of the things that's the hardest thing to teach is to teach to an individual student when you have 6 of them or 7 of them or 10 of them in the classroom. Or if you're getting into regular education, then you got 20 of them in the classroom. So how do you teach to that individual student the best way that you can, the best way that they learn? Because I know, I don't think I'm stupid or anything. I don't think I'm this great genius or anything, but I got like a 900 on the SATs. Everybody else was getting like 1,300, 1,200. Why couldn't I learn the math and the writing and the reading? What was the matter with me? Because they didn't show it to me in pictures. They didn't show it to me in visuals. Okay. They didn't teach me in a way that I could understand it. I think that might be an incredible future for education. Could be something like this. And also, it could be a toy. I know I want one, and I want to play with it. So think of a light bright for the 21st century. That's
Yeah, makes sense. Finally, Daniel, for the parents of disabled children or specifically blind and low vision, what are some of the advice you have and what are some of the resources would you recommend?
for parents. There are lots of resources out there, and Facebook is a great place to start, actually. I've gotten in touch with a lot of parent groups through Facebook because parents are going to be one of the users of this, because that's one of the things it was designed for. So it could go to your house and you could be the teacher. You could start to be a teacher. You don't need a certified teacher to start. So for parents, and there's also the American Foundation of the Blind, the National Federation of the Blind, and each one of these large organizations has smaller organizations for parents. And each one of those smaller organizations have statewide organizations. So there's a lot of resources out there for parents of children who are blind. Not so much in other countries. So if you're in another country, don't give up though. There are people around who want to help, and they're usually found in the bigger cities, obviously. But if I went to Chennai in India and they had some schools set up, they had a whole building actually set up for people with disabilities, for kids who were deafblind, so deaf and blind. So there are resources out there, but it's a fight too. That's another thing I would say to parents. You got to fight. Nobody's going to hand it to you. Nobody's going to just say, okay, I'm going to spend $6,000 on your kid's education out of our budget. No, you have to fight for it. And I had to fight for my kid, just like everybody else has to fight to get the proper resources. They don't accept the fact that you're going to get Braille once a week. Say no. Twice a week, 3 times a week. Okay, that's why I want Braille. But we don't start your son on Braille because he already sees a bit. Guess what? He can't read like everybody else. So if he can't read like everybody else, then he should be learning Braille. Okay? You got to stand up and fight.
Daniel, I really wish all the very best for your inventions. I do hope it becomes mainstream and a lot of people benefit from it. I really wish you all the very best. And thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
This episode was recorded in 2024. Since then, Daniel has launched Braille Doodle and it is now available in several parts of the world. You can find more information on touchpadprofoundation.org. That's it for today's episode of Career Calling. I hope you found it helpful. I'll be back soon with more stories of professions from all walks of life to help you find your calling. Until then, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word.